Blessed to be with you, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Phone numbers 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Don't forget, you can always get our free newsletter by signing up at our website and our free app by going to the App Store or Google Play. Joining us now, former CIA agent, international filmmaker to the stars, Dan Gabriel. Good morning, sir.
Kevin Miller, great to be back with you. How are you doing today?
Good to have you with us. So, your documentary, Mosul, getting a lot of great reviews. We'll get to that and maybe pick your brain about the film-making process, which we did the last time. But importantly, as we go through the day, obviously the CIA worried about international foes and such. But as a former CIA agent, CIA employee, CIA person, your thoughts on these shootings that are apparently happening more often than not in the United States, sir?
Yeah, well, look, there's no question they're getting more frequent and more deadly and effective each year, it seems. I do think this weekend was perhaps a turning point in how we look at this, and perhaps our willingness to call it what I believe it really is, which is domestic terrorism. So, of course, if you look at the shooter in El Paso, he clearly had political motives, and of course, that's the definition of terrorism: violence committed in the name of a political end goal.
You look at the El Paso shooter and even the one in Dayton, the planning it took to go buy the body armor, to buy the weapons, to plan this out, to drive 10 hours. As someone who studied terrorism and terrorists and fought against them, what goes into somebody's mind? Is it too much for us to think where was just one rational thought that would have said to them, hey, this might not be a good idea to stop them from killing Americans?
Yeah, the process of radicalization is much longer than people think, and it's much more complex and complicated, and actually very different from individual to individual. One of the things that we did was a project a while back in the Middle East, looking at the reasons why people would join ISIS. And it actually turned into a TV series that we did, and it had 13 different episodes, actually 26 because it was over 2 seasons. And one of the things that we found is each of these 13 individuals, and they were guys and girls, young and old, they all joined the organization for a different reason. So, this guy in El Paso's got a different reason than the guy in Dayton. But what we need to try to do is to look at what are the commonalities, what are the things that they do have in common, besides, of course, that ability to just flip off the switch on their humanity and let that darkness come in and kill innocent people.
When we take a look at where we go from here, is prevention an opportunity? I mean, is that even possible?
I think it is. I think it's more important than possible. It's necessary and incumbent upon us to do that. If you look at the way that our government handles this right now, typically these types of crimes are charged as a hate crime or as just an assault with intent to murder, conspiracy perhaps. But what we don't do is typically have any laws on the books for domestic terrorism per se. And I think that the ability to do that's something that's being kicked around in Congress now. The idea is being floated is going to allow law enforcement community to really start looking at the ideologies that are behind these attacks, and beyond just the specific criminal act themselves. And that's really the only way that you're going to get ahead of this, because you can't just wait until they try to buy the gun. Or until until they get on the X, so to speak. You're going to really have to try to get ahead of this and get into the ideology if you're going to have any hope of turning somebody off this path towards this type of violence.
Dan Gabriel joining us, producer, director, probably grip for the film Mosul, former employee agent of the CIA on KIDO Talk Radio with Kevin Miller in the morning. What about these red flag laws? I know that might be outside your purview or what you'd like to talk about. What do you make of that, though?
Well, look, it definitely seems to have the support of the president, and I think a growing number of Republicans are perhaps willing to pass gun control measures that they wouldn't have even considered a year ago. I would say this. We've got a lot of veterans in this country that own firearms. It's a big part of the Second Amendment community. We also have a lot of veterans in this country that have PTSD. So I think you're probably going to be looking at a situation sooner rather than later where a veteran that may have been through some stuff in Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere is gonna have his guns yanked, going to have his firearms yanked, and we're going to have to get our minds around that and how we're going to deal with that. And it's not going to be easy, and I think it's going to be a long public discussion.
Let's talk a little bit about your expertise with this film, Mosul. For people that aren't familiar with it, you can get it on just about any streaming service. Very compelling, very dangerous. You've served your country. Thank you for your service. Why go back in there just to film a documentary?
Well, as it turns out, this documentary is quite important, personal and local to veterans that served both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's one of the things that I've realized, kind of in the process of bringing it around the country and screening it for veterans. This is really their story, and although it's an Iraqi story in the sense that it's all Iraqis, it's all in Arabic with English subtitles, but this is really focuses on the Iraqi security forces in 2016 to 2017 that are fighting ISIS. It's really their story because they're the ones that were there in 04, 06, or 07 or 8, and they're the ones that made the initial sacrifice. And what happened in 2014 when ISIS took over Mosul, which was the second largest city in Iraq, I think it made a lot of them sit up and say, well, what was that all for? What was that all about? If we're gonna allow basically the government form of Al Qaeda to take over the second largest city in Iraq, then why did we waste all our time and lose so many friends there? And of course, it took a bit of time for the U.S. government to kind of recognize the danger that ISIS posed. Of course, we were calling them the JV team, and that was clearly not the case. But in fact, Operation Inherent Resolve did come along in the fall of 2015 and start putting together the pieces that would ultimately lead to the military success over ISIS in Mosul. And I'd warn that there's still a long way to go in terms of dealing with ISIS. It's certainly a threat that's still out there. It's adapting. It's evolving. It's not the same as it was, but they don't hold the territory that they did. But there was a report out yesterday out of the Pentagon that said there's actually the same number of ISIS fighters in both Iraq and Syria.
Dan Gabriel joining us. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. His film Mosul. Check it out. Amazon Prime. Daniel, let us know where else you can get it. But was it a failure? What was it a failure of, sir? This is an open-ended question. That we didn't see ISIS coming. Maybe we did, and we have the comments from former President Obama about being the JV team, but their brutality, and not only their sheer brutality, but to put it on social media, the atrocities that we haven't seen on video and maybe ever. How did we miss that?
Yeah, it was very straightforward, and of course there were those that didn't miss it. There were those that 5-6 years ago were warning what would happen if we had a precipitous withdrawal from Iraq, and of course that's exactly what happened. We rushed out of Iraq with all of the lack of planning and thought that we rushed in, and we need to make sure that we don't make the same mistake now in Afghanistan. Of course, the peace negotiations are going on this week and later this month, and it does seem like we're about to cut a deal, some type of a deal with the Taliban, to bring them into perhaps a power-sharing arrangement with the government of Afghanistan. Of course, just this morning we saw there's an attack, 13 killed, 100 wounded by a Taliban suicide bomber in West Kabul, targeting Shia. So we've got to really pay attention. And the threat, like I mentioned just a minute ago, it's not over in Iraq either. And the Pentagon OIG report from yesterday tells us exactly that. So what was really misunderstood or underestimated was the impact of a political vacuum that existed in that part of the world, and what can happen if there's no strong functioning civil society and government to make sure things like that don't happen.
Well, agreed. And as you know, they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. What is the long term when you have every major Democratic candidate saying it's time to peace out? What would be the consequences of us having an Iraq type withdrawal in Afghanistan?
Well, I think we looked at what we essentially accomplished with Operation Inherent Resolve. And again, that was the operation that the U.S. put together to support both the Syrian rebels across the border and the Iraqi security forces in Iraq. But we need to look towards how do we build up our local partners? How do we strengthen them? How do we have them do the fighting? We can equip them, we can train them, perhaps provide air support. But ultimately, we've got to make it their fight. And we've got to do the same thing in Afghanistan. So I think there's lessons learned or lessons to be learned with the victory that was achieved in October 2016, 2017, and that's one of the things we show in Mosul.
Back to Mosul, you've lived in the dark world for years. You're doing the exact opposite now. That's kind of a big boomerang.
It is. The agency is a place, the CIA is a place where, of course, there's so much to see and be part of and stories to tell, but you can't while you're there. Even to some extent after you leave, you can't. So, the story of Mosul was always near and dear to my heart, and the ability to tell it was something that I always thought was important. But I do think it's important for people to know, that there's folks in the CIA, good people doing good things around the world, supporting the military and going into places where life is not what we experience here in the U.S., but nevertheless, important missions that need to be undertaken.
Finally, we don't really hear a lot about the CIA officers killed in the line of duty. I had a chance many years ago to meet the widow of Johnny Michael Spann, Shannon Spann. The American Taliban was released recently, but Johnny Michael Spann was the first CIA officer, the first American killed in the war to free Afghanistan. And many people have seen the movies of the wall with the stars. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes to be a CIA officer and that wall where you have officers killed in the line of duty?
Yeah, I can say, and I've met Shannon Spann as well. She's a tremendous woman. It's just so courageous, and it was just a pleasure to know her. But yeah, I mean that wall is so near and dear to the CIA. I think the military's got lots of different monuments and different ways of paying respect and different important dates. But for the CIA, it really does come down to in the old headquarters, walking across that field, and that wall is right there with 100 some odd names, or not names, but stars on it, each representing a different life and a different experience and a different sacrifice. And there's a book there it's a classified book actually, and it contains the stories of basically each person in that book and what happened. Some of them will be declassified, some of them have been declassified, but by and large, they'll remain known only to their friends and family and colleagues that they worked with at the agency.
And finally, for people that would want to check out your movie, what can they do? How can they get it?
Sure. The easiest way is iTunes or Amazon. You can also get it from mosul-film.com. And if you buy the DVD of Blu-ray, you can use the promo code RADIO, RADIO, for a 20% off code on mosul-film.com.
Dan, we appreciate you. Thank you for your service and for making yourself available, sir. You have a great day.
Kevin, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care. Dan Gabriel, CIA officer, retired, now international filmmaker. Coming up next, your reaction to ISIS is back. Is it legit? Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Rolling around on the right side, Kevin Miller in the morning. Coming up, bad news for the Boy Scouts. But first, Ron Paul Jim joins us. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Ron Paul Jim.
Good morning, Kevin. I just wanted to point out, you said something about wanting to peace out of the Middle East, and we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Look at the track record of each of these wars or proxy wars that were in the Middle East. Unless the mission was to simply create, to destabilize, to destroy, mission accomplished, if that was the mission. Look at what is the condition of Libya since the toppling of Saddam regime? Of Gaddafi.
Horrible.
How about Syria? Is it better or worse since we've been involved?
Destabilized.
Iraq, looking good.
More stable under Saddam.
So, what does vital U.S. interest actually mean? Because that is the phrase that is always used to justify our involvement in these countries.
Oil.
Is it? We're independent of oil, of those countries.
That's what we say.
Isn't it? Isn't it more about the control of the world's currency, keeping the Federal Reserve in control of, making it the world's currency? Because, as far as I could see, that's not all it is. That may be controlling resources such as oil. But, look at Afghanistan. Has it been better or worse? I can tell you something that's gotten dramatically worse since we've gone to Afghanistan. And it's since we were over there protecting the opium fields and production ramped up over 200%. What is that? The opium price.
Well, Ron Paul, Jim, and we've talked about this for years. What would be your solution? You tell me, sir.
Well, you can't I don't want to say that word. What we've done already, but we can stop doing it. And that's to get out. We need to get out of these areas. What was it? Stick to the principles of the founding fathers of the Constitution that, trade with other nations, avoid foreign entanglement. We need to stay out of this stuff. There was none of these were in defense of our country. Nobody threatened to or declared war. The ones that actually you could justify as a declaration of war are two countries. Unfortunately, one of them is our greatest ally, which I just don't understand that definition either. Please explain to me, what is it that makes Israel our greatest ally? What exactly is it that they're doing for us? Kind of like, why are we in the Middle East? There is no threat to the United States from the Middle East, but then Israel is our greatest ally. We have to go fight wars for them. Then the other one is Saudi Arabia. Israel attacked the USS Liberty. Like it or not, in all aspects, that would have been a declaration of war. Only that one actually happened, whereas, the Gulf of Tonkin did not. That was staged. So we're being said, this you had this spook on here talking about his, time in the CIA. Yeah, now he's going to make some money on it, probably spin it some way that glorifies all this Secret Service that we cannot know what's going on because we're not privy to know. There needs to be light shine on all of it. We could see what happened, to Donald Trump when all of these Secret Service, FBI and every three-letter thing out there is working to undermine the people that we elect. So I don't have any affection for any of those agencies. They can tell us anything. We don't have any proof. We're always told Iran is the greatest sponsor of terror. Prove it. Show us actual proof. And compare it to what we've done. Well, we call it a different thing. We call it, a proxy war. We don't call it terrorism. But that's exactly what that is.
Ron Paul, Jim, great call. Thank you for listening. KIDO Talk Radio, traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. And Jim in Middleton, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Not bad. Good to hear from you, sir.
You bet. Hey, by the way, Kevin, the next fundraiser you do for the rescue mission, I will come back over and cook again.
That'll be great.
And I'll bring more food and what have you, and we'll have a good time and make fun of have fun with the whole deal there. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. So count on me for that.
That'll be awesome. Thank you.
Bet. Anyway, Ron Paul Jim made some really good points. I have similar views about that. I do a lot of deep thinking for the truth, and a lot of what our hierarchy does, the powers that be, leaves you to scratch your head a little bit sometimes, Kevin, and I don't think our best interest is at heart. Well, I think we both know that usually it isn't.
We talk about the dictatorships. We talk about the Iranians. We take a look. I mean, we have somebody as passionate as Ron Paul Jim, and I do something a little differently than most people. I like to hear other points of views. I know you do, and then get people to react to them. Now, we could go back and forth on the Middle East and everything else, and, we're lying in bed with, the fleas and such. And there are some issues. We look the other way when dictatorships are friendly to us. The Iranians, obviously, they took our hostages. They've got the nukes. They're funding terrorism. But it's fascinating to hear what Ron Paul Jim has to say, and there's a lot of Americans agree with him on that we shouldn't be. In fact, Donald Trump ran on that, Jim. He said, "Look,
right.
Let's get out of these wars."
Yeah, and Kevin, I mean, I read what is it, Carl Mead, Tripoli Pirates?
Yeah,
he's on Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
I read his book, and I got a much better understanding of the warlike or the chaos of the Middle Eastern people, Islam. Okay, they definitely have their issues, Kevin. There's no two ways about it. Before the United States even came to really being, they were a big bully on the planet Earth, and they've been, if they're not fighting somebody else, they're fighting each other. And I understand their mentality and sometimes what we need to do. But, I question some of our tactics when, I've been a businessman most of my life. I retired a couple times and what have you. And in business, I equate business to warfare. Okay, this may sound a little funny to you. Okay, and I'm not talking about hurting another human being or being dishonest and what have you. But you have to be, Kevin. You got to dig down deep. When you're in business on your own, there's no safety net. There's nothing. So you're on your own, and you use some really hard tactics. You work hard. You think. You're constantly thinking to get ahead and to overcome the obstacles that people put in front of you or government and so forth. Okay? And when I see us taking the same real estate over and over again, and when I see politicians campaigning on things that they've been campaigning on for the last 50 years, you kind of wonder, when I set a task before me, a challenge or a goal, Kevin, I eventually got it done and went through the obstacles and over, around, or what have you. And when I see our politicians operate, and I see them talk, you heard me use the phrase many times, you talk, but you got to walk your talk. And I love a good talker. I love to listen to people, what have you. But there again, if you don't execute your plan and your goal and get the results, well, then all your talk was for nothing.
Well, and you're right, Jim. What's the definition of insanity? I got to run, but thank you, Jim.
You bet. Take care, Kevin.
Thank you. God bless. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Maggie. Covering the news that matters to you. Joining us now from Fox News Radio, live from London, Simon Owen. Simon, good morning.
Morning, Kevin.
In school, we learned about the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, how fierce they were, and then World War I happened, the Middle East entirely redone, and yet Turkey still very important. A member of NATO that's kind of wavering a little. They're in the news right now, possibly looking to invade Syria.
Yes, and a possible clash with the United States as well. The new Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, is overseas at the moment. He's on his first foreign trip since being sworn in at the Pentagon. He's been in Japan today, but he's also been talking about Turkey. As you say, there have been tensions in recent months and years with the United States. Most recently, Turkey has taken delivery of a Russian missile defense system, which has got the United States very unhappy because the U.S. has concerns about the fact that Turkey also has American fighter jets. So what kind of capabilities is Russia going to be able to garner about that kind of military hardware if it's got Russian defense systems as well? The latest situation is to do, with Syria and an apparent threat from the Turkish president to invade northern Syria and push back or attack Kurdish forces. Now, these are Kurdish fighters who've been very useful to the United States in recent years, played a really key role, did a lot of the heavy lifting in the fight against ISIS, a lot of the groundwork, which meant the U.S. didn't have to send ground troops in huge numbers. But they are fighters who Turkey considers terrorists. And Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said this week, it's our country's top priority to drain the terror swamp in Syria's north. He's been threatening this for months. This sounds like it may be a bit closer on this occasion. So Defense Secretary Mark Esper is warning Turkey against that. He said any unilateral action by Turkey would be unacceptable. And he also said, intriguingly, that the U.S. would prevent any Turkish invasion.
And really, the Turks have been very close to Vladimir Putin in the past, uncomfortably so, buying some weapons from Russia. The United States wasn't happy about it. But, Simon, this battle between the Turks and the Kurds, some would argue the loyalist allies to America in that region, has been going on for many, many years, probably centuries between these two foes.
Yes, it's a long-standing dispute, that's for sure. There is a different complexion to it at the moment, though, because the Kurds have only just completed this deadly mission to help the U.S. with combating and pushing away ISIS control from various parts of Syria. And so there is this sense that the U.S. wants to protect them. There are also concerns about U.S. forces who are actually working with them. But for months, the U.S. and Turkey have been talking, trying to find a compromise in this situation, and they haven't succeeded. Now, Turkey's defense minister has been actually speaking about this today, and he said that the latest round of talks, which we think are still going on, have actually been much more positive, and he's suggesting there could be a resolution to this in the next few hours. So we'll have to wait and see. But certainly they've been talking on and off for a number of months about this. And the idea is that the US and Turkey would create a sort of buffer zone in Syria. It would basically push the Kurds away from Turkey's borders. But that's what so far they haven't been able to settle on.
Right. And of course, we can go back to the war in Iraq, the first one, where America gave air cover to the Kurds for a while and then peaced out and left them to the Iraqis, which wasn't good for the Kurds. So there's been a tumultuous relationship between America and the Kurds for quite some time.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately they are a stateless people, and so they have concern that, ever since President Trump said, gosh, it was about Christmas time, I think, that he was going to pull the U.S. out of Syria, there has been concerns among the Kurds that they were going to be hung out to dry. And actually what we've seen from Kurdish officials in recent days is a reprise of a threat they made a while ago, which is to say that if they are overrun by Turkish forces, then they can't guarantee that the thousands of ISIS prisoners they are holding will still be secure in the sites where they're being held, that those sites could fall, and therefore you could have thousands of ISIS fighters on the run. So, look, it's a potentially a rather messy situation. Turkey has been threatening this invasion for many months now, and it hasn't happened yet. So, will they come back from the brink? We'll wait and see. But to see President Erdogan talking about draining a terror swamp, he's certainly not pulling any punches in his typically combative language.
Well, that was a good sentence, Simon. Have a great day. Take care.
That's what I'm paid for.
See you, Simon.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, sir. I wish I could pull that one off. That was really good. A sad day for the Boy Scouts of America. Let's get the latest on KIDO Talk Radio.
Epidemic. That is how a new lawsuit describes the problem of child sex abuse in the Boy Scouts of America.
You cannot trust the Boy Scouts of America to weed out the bad apples because they haven't.
Accusations of child sex abuse have plagued the organization for over a decade. But this complaint, filed on behalf of one anonymous accuser, alleges 350 new victims have come forward this year, and that the Boy Scouts of America hid the scope of the problem for decades to protect its reputation and the alleged abusers, including a former mayor and a local doctor.
That night, we're lights out and I'm going asleep and stuff, and I feel breath on my neck. And I feel somebody touching me, and I hear his voice.
James Kretschmer, who spoke to NBC News last month, says in the 1970s he was molested by a scout leader while on a camping trip.
He touched you inappropriately.
Oh, yeah, he groped me.
While NBC News is not able to independently verify his account, we did speak with multiple people who confirmed Kretschmer told them of the alleged incident at the time.
We have a client who's 14 years old, and we have a client who's 97 years old.
In a statement, the Boy Scouts of America says, in part, we immediately investigated the limited information provided by the alleged victims' attorneys and made 120 reports to law enforcement. The organization says it believes the victims and sincerely apologizes to anyone who was harmed. and that it has taken significant steps over many years to ensure that it responds aggressively to reports of abuse. But Kretschmer says the Boy Scouts of America is beyond repair.
The organization should burn to the ground, and out of the ashes, maybe an organization will come out that will protect our children.
Stephanie, why are they filing the lawsuit now?
The accuser's attorney says he was concerned that the Boy Scouts was going to file for bankruptcy, which would put a hold on any new lawsuit. So he put out this public appeal for victims to come forward, and they did.
There you have it. The Boy Scouts of America under siege. When we grew up in America, and those that are growing up in America now, beloved the Boy Scouts. What has happened to our world today? Of course, we've changed the name of the Boy Scouts to the Scouts because they want to bring in the girls. I don't know if they're going to bring in boys to the Girl Scouts, but that's a story for another time. If we accomplish one thing in our time together, I like to joke sometimes that this program is about, entertainment purposes only, but right now, this pedophilia, the attacks on our institutions, has to end. People make jokes all the time about the Catholic Church, about pastors and little boys, about sexual assault, sexual abuse. Let's face it, this threat has to be stopped. We had a Catholic priest in his 70s, Father Fauché. Mayor Dave Beater wrote him letters of recommendation all the time. Stood up for him. Fauché had photos of children so disgusting they couldn't even be described. People say, see something, say something. This predatory actions have to stop. And it is amazing to me, in my advanced age, how I see how many people have been hurt by this. And look, are we going to attack the Boy Scouts of America? No. I'm amazed at how many politicians, like Congressman Labrador, former Congressman Labrador, chairman of the Republican Party, was an Eagle Scout, and what being an Eagle Scout meant to him. And to have that discipline early on in life. Now, the news reports makes it sound like every scout, every person was assaulted. No. But where were people to help these kids? We must vow to eradicate this. We must hold those accountable. The institutions, whether they're the Boy Scouts of America or the Catholic Church, are strong enough to survive it. They must, and any organization must, cleanse themselves of these predators. And these predators must be shown the light of day and be held accountable. What person would do that, entrusted with their children, other people's children, to have that type of disconnect, that irresponsible, unexplainable, unacceptable disconnect to harm one's child and then to cover it up? Again, this is deep, but I know we're up to it. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. John in Nampa, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio.
Hey, how you doing?
Good morning. Go ahead, please, sir.
Well, just something about the Boy Scouts of America. I know with relations and stuff to try to avoid these types of things, and one of the biggest things they do, at least with the Cub Scouts on up, is actually require that the kids go through training and sit down with their parents and discuss how and what the rules are with adults. That they are not supposed to be by themselves with any adult. They're not supposed to be doing anything by themselves with an adult. They're supposed to be with two adults at all times. And so it's step one to the faith. But I do believe that the next phase would be to make sure that there are no people that have a record for predatory situations anything similar for that matter, to be able to be a leader or a troop leader for the program. So, I mean, I understand that it does happen. People are dumb enough and stupid enough and terrible enough to do things like that. But they do have some aspects to try to handle this and stop this and require the adults to follow those same regulations. So if they're breaking those rules, kids should be telling their parents right away that even the leader brought them aside individually at all. So they do try to stop it.
Well, and unfortunately, this has happened years ago in the past, talking about a victim who's 96. It appears the Boy Scouts have corrected things, but what do you do about what happened in the past? And now you're going to have people ripping and making fun of the Scouts and saying, well, I don't want my kid in that group, which to me appears to be un-American.
Yeah, I'm the Eagle self. It's something very much I respect, and I honor that. And I was a troop leader for a while, my wife. But it's something that I think, just like with a race, it's something that sticks with you. And oftentimes people will tell stuff later without having the evidence anymore, and it's hard to tell what's real, what's not, but also hard to really fix the problem once it's gone that long. There's no way to really return it at that point, especially if this guy is like 96, you know? Like, what's he going to do? Like, we can't just we'll throw him in jail for 3 years, or we won't let him get medical care or something. You know, like, where do you go with that? Like, it becomes a very hard situation to be able to progress forward with if it's not addressed when it happens. And so I think the big thing that we need to talk about in our community is about how soon we need to talk about when preditization happens, and how children need to feel safe to talk to other adults when these types of things happen, and that they are safe to discuss these things if someone tries to threaten them in any way from talking about it.
Agreed.
Our family unit's been destroyed by other people, and I think it's important that we understand that the stronger our family unit is with our children, the less likely these things are to continue when they happen. That it's important to build that relationship with your children and spend that time to do so, because these types of things do happen, whether it be this or whether it be something less extreme.
John, thank you for the call and listening to KIDO Talk Radio.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you. There you have it. Eagle Scout talking about the Boy Scouts. More on that in a minute. KIDO Talk Radio, traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. And I'm Kevin Miller on your home for Fox News on the radio right here in the Treasure Valley. KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Good morning.